There's a moment that a lot of us know. You're sitting in church, maybe it's a Sunday morning, maybe it's one of those 5-hour-long feast days, and two things are happening at the same time. Part of you is completely at home. You're in your church, you're in your space. You know the songs, you know when to sit, when to stand. You know the people around you. You know which auntie is bringing paisam afterward and which uncle is actually going to give the 45-minute long testimony before the sermon. You know all of it. And part of you, a part of you that maybe you don't talk about as much, is somewhere else. Maybe you're thinking about the world outside of these doors in this church, the one where you have a different name, where people know you for different things and people don't actually call your mom and dad uncle and auntie, where faith, if it does come up at all, looks nothing like this. That tension between those two worlds is what this space is all about. My name is Alex Thomas, and this is Margam. Margam means path or way in Malayalam and some other South Indian languages. It also happens to be one of the oldest words used for the Christian faith in India. Long before it was called Christianity, it was referred to as the Margam, or the way. And I thought that was fitting to title this podcast. This is for the Indian American Christian who grew up in between two worlds, for the person who can quote the Bible and also know extensively about your own church history, for the person who loves their church and also has real questions about it, for the person who spent their entire life being Indian or Ethiopian or Korean or any other ethnicity in one room and American in another, the one who's still figuring out what it means to be both at the same time, in the same body, in the same faith. And it's for anyone who's curious about all of this from the outside. A culture that was their own, built from pieces of both, belonging fully to neither. Indian Americans are one of the most defining third culture communities in the United States. First-generation immigrants brought a world with them. Their children were born into two of these worlds simultaneously. And the church, the Indian church here in the US, exists right at the intersection of both. Here's what makes the Indian Christian experience specifically unusual. Even in a country full of immigrant communities, Christianity is not a colonial import. This is the thing most people, including a lot of Indian Americans, don't actually know. The tradition that Thomas, one of the apostles of Jesus, landed on the Malabar coast of what is now Kerala in 52 AD is older than most of European Christianity, older than the Church of England by 15 centuries, older than the Catholic Church as Rome knows it today. So when a Syro-Malabar family or a Jacobite family or a CSI family walks into their church in Dallas or Chicago or New Jersey, they are not practicing a borrowed religion. They are practicing something that has been theirs for over 2,000 years. And yet here in America, that history seems to be invisible to their neighbors, to their coworkers, often to their own children. There's a particular kind of invisibility that comes with this experience. You're not African American, so you don't fit the narrative around race and Christianity. You're not white, so you don't fit the default image of what a Christian looks like in this country. And you're not Muslim or Hindu, which is what most Americans assume when they hear Indian. So you end up in this strange no man's land. Too Christian for one conversation, too Indian for another, and too American for a third. That's the third culture experience, and it's what this podcast is trying to name and take seriously. So let's go back to the beginning. The year is 52 AD, and the Apostle Thomas, oftentimes called Doubting Thomas, the one who demanded to see the wounds of Jesus, has made his way from the Middle East to the southwestern coast of India. He lands in what is now Kerala. He preaches, people turn to this new way, and communities are formed. We call these the St. Thomas Christians, and for the next 1,500 years, they do something remarkable. They flourish largely on their own, without much interference from the rest of the Christian world. Everything changed in 1498 when Vasco da Gama arrives on the Malabar coast. The Portuguese are Catholic, and they were not particularly interested in searching for a Christian community that predated them by 14 centuries. They're interested in trade and territory and in bringing this community under the authority of Rome. What follows is one of the most painful chapters in Indian Christian history. The Synod of Dampur in 1599 forced the St. Thomas Christians into Roman Catholic submission, burning ancient liturgical texts, replacing the Syriac rite with Latin forms, and breaking apart a community that had been held together for over a millennium. 64 years later, in 1653, a large faction of the community gathered around a cross planted in the ground in Muttoncherry. It's called the Coonan Cross, and they swear an oath. They swear that they will never submit to Rome again. From that split and from the centuries that followed, including the British colonial period, the arrival of Protestant missionaries, and the political shifts of the 20th century, we get the many traditions that most Indian American Christians come from today. The Syro-Malabar Church and the Syro-Malankara Church, which are in full communion with Rome, the Malankara Orthodox Syrian Church, and the Jacobite Syrian Orthodox Church, which trace their roots through the Eastern Syriac tradition, the Church of South India and the Margam Church, which carry the fingerprints of Protestant reform, and the Pentecostal and non-denominational communities that grew out of the revival movements of the 20th century. And if you're from Kerala and you are a Christian, you probably come from one of these streams. But here's the thing, most people don't actually know about the others. Even when you're sitting in the same city in America, even in the same zip code, most people just have a lack of understanding of the other traditions. And that's part of what Margam is here for. I want to give you a map, not a theological textbook, just a map. So when we talk about someone from the Jacobite Church, and then someone from a Pentecostal church, and then someone who grew up in the Church of South India and converted to non-denom, or whatever it may be, you have a sense of where each of these traditions is coming from. So here's just a brief overview of the Catholic streams. The Syro-Malabar Church is the largest Eastern Catholic Church in India, in full communion with Rome, but with its own ancient rite, its own liturgy, its own language, mostly in Syriac. If you've been to a Syro-Malabar Qurbana or Mass, you know it feels different than a traditional Latin Mass. It's older, it may feel stranger, it may have a more ancient feeling. And then we have the Syro-Malankara Catholic Church, which came later. It was founded in the 20th century by Archbishop Mar Ivanios, who brought part of the Malankara community back into communion with Rome, smaller than the Syro-Malabar Church, but with deep liturgical roots. Then we have the Orthodox streams. The Malankara Orthodox Syrian Church and the Jacobite Syrian Orthodox Church are actually in a very long-running canonical dispute over property, over apostolic succession, over which body has legitimate authority. Though they share the same ancient roots, the same basic liturgy, and the same Syriac heritage, they've been fighting over it in Indian courts for decades. In this video, I don't have the time or the resources to get into the differences between the Jacobite Church and the Malankara Orthodox Church, but from what I've heard from Uchins and lay people in the US, the differences don't come up as much here in the diaspora as they do in India. The unfortunate reality is that these two communities were so connected. They were basically family, and now there's a huge splinter between them. Next, we have the Reformed streams. The Marthoma Church occupies a fascinating middle space. It's a Reformed Eastern church, influenced by Anglican missionaries, but it held on to its Oriental heritage. It's liturgical, but not fully Catholic. It's apostolic, but somewhat Protestant in its theology. If you want to understand what it means to be a bridge tradition, the Marthoma Church is one of the best examples in the world. The Church of South India is even further in the Protestant direction. A union church formed in 1947, the same year India gained independence. It brought together Anglicans and Methodists, Presbyterians, and Congregationalists. It's one of the most ecumenically significant churches in the world, and it's entirely unknown outside of South Asian communities. And then there's the Pentecostal movement, and its cousin, the non-denominational church. These communities grew out of the early 20th century revivals that swept through Kerala, and they've been growing ever since. In the Indian American context, they're often the churches where the second generation lands, because the worship is often in English, the sermons are accessible, and the cultural barriers are sometimes lower. These are also sometimes the churches that first generation families look at with suspicion. Maybe they're too emotional, too informal, and not our tradition. That tension between the ancient and the contemporary, between ethnic and multicultural, is one of the most live questions in the Indian American church right now. So here's the question I hear a lot, usually from people in their 20s and 30s. The question underneath the question: why does any of this matter? Why does it matter which church your grandparents came from, or what happened in 1599 or 1653, or what the difference is between Jacobite and Orthodox? You're here, you're in America, you have your own faith, your own relationship with God. Why do you need the history? I think it matters for a few reasons. First, identity doesn't just disappear when you stop paying attention to it. It oftentimes goes underground. The things you don't examine still shape you. Your assumptions about how your church works, your instincts about authority and tradition, your gut reaction when someone worships differently than you. These things come from somewhere. Knowing where they come from gives you a choice about them. Second, the Indian American Christian community is at a genuine crossroads right now. The first generation built institutions, churches, fellowships, organizations. The second generation is now asking whether those same institutions speak to them at a deep level, whether there's a version of this faith and this community that is both authentically theirs and open enough to hold their actual lives. That's not a crisis, that's a conversation that every living tradition goes through, but it requires people who are willing to actually have the conversation, not just retreat into the comfort of what they already know. Thirdly, the outside world is increasingly interested in this community. Indian Americans are the fastest growing people group in the United States that most people know almost nothing about. Christian Indian Americans even more so because they confuse the categories. We're not what people expect. This is a moment to tell our stories accurately, on our own terms, before someone else tells it for us. All of them are part of this story. All of them are on this path. If you want to continue following along, subscribe, and if this episode spoke to you, leave me a comment below. Thanks for being here. I'll see you on the next episode.